Hello, this is Pamela Cuccinell, and I'm going to talk to you a little about the Great American Eclipse that happens August 21st, 2017, and cuts through Oregon down into South Carolina. It basically splits the country in half at a diagonal, and we can talk more about that. This is going to be a brief introduction to the eclipse. There's so much to say, but basically eclipses, they upset the natural order of things. And if you look at old text about astrology and advice for astrology, there's lots of information about staying indoors and meditating and keeping a low profile and not doing anything too active because, of course, eclipses could cause and can cause serious damage. You do not look at an eclipse without some sort of cover on your eye, and it has to be a good cover, not sunglasses. These are my eclipse glasses, and now I cannot see a darn thing. They're essentially welder's glass type things, and they block the intensity of the sun because when it's down to a sliver, it's very intense. So even though an eclipse upsets the natural order of things, where we have a very cyclical way of the relationship with the sun and moon, and there's twilight, there's night, and then there's dawn, and the animals and we all, whether we're paying attention to it or not, are going with this natural cycle. So when this happens, and eclipses occur several times a year, it's just the difference with this particular eclipse is it's total, and which means it's not going to be something just partial or just a little sliver. The moon is going to be totally in front of the sun for a 70-mile track throughout the United States. And therefore, it's become a terrific event. There is symbolic reference to what's going on now in the sky and what's happening here on Earth. That eclipses seem to upset the natural order of things, and yet eclipses are the natural order of things. Eclipses can be absolutely tracked long before telescopes and science because they go in particular cycles, and this eclipse that's coming through now is part of what's known as the Saros cycle. So it begins at one pole and then ends up at the other. So it begins at the north and ends up at the south, or however that works. In this case, it's going south. So the Saros cycle, this is a trackable eclipse, and it has happened before. It hasn't happened in this exact configuration before, this exact path, but the eclipse itself is something that occurs at this point in time and has occurred before and will occur again. So we astrologers tend to be researchers and historians. We look back in order to help us see forward. My father used to say, you can't know where you're going unless you know where you are. And not that he intended his daughter to become an astrologer, but it is something to keep in mind. You have to know where you are. You have to be present. It's part of mindfulness. It's part of being aware. So wherever you are at the solar eclipse, whether you're chasing it to be somewhere where you can actually be in the total darkness that will happen with it, whether you're in Europe and therefore only can see it on YouTube or television, or whether you're somewhere north or south in the United States of the eclipse and you get to see it partly. Wherever you are, it still is having a symbolic effect on outcome. It's mirroring things that are happening here. So eclipses go in pairs. So if there's a solar eclipse, which there is, then there was a lunar eclipse either before or after. In this case, the lunar eclipse came before, and it happened a couple of weeks prior. And it happened August 7th exactly. And it happened at what we call the Aries point. So the eclipse actually was at 15 degrees Aquarius, and that's what we call 15 degrees fixed. And 15 degrees fixed is mathematically the same when we distill it down as 0 degrees cardinal. So in other words, the middle of a cycle in a fixed sign, in this case, Leo, because when the lunar eclipse happened at 15 degrees Aquarius, that's a full moon, so its mate was the sun at 15 degrees Leo. That's in the middle of Leo, because there's 30 degrees in a sign. And that is mathematically the same, once we distill it down, as 0 degrees cardinal, which is when the equinoxes and solstices happen, the signs that begin seasons. So this is, even though it was a quieter eclipse, because nobody really saw it or noticed it, especially in the United States, because it happened in daytime. So when a full moon eclipse happens in daytime, you don't see it, because the moon is not really out in a way you can see it. It has a subconscious influence. And the moon is about soul expression. And I was on a panel recently talking about the eclipse cycle and this eclipse, this solar eclipse coming up. And one of the things that we were talking about were people's concerns about the United States, the president, who's the leader of the country, who represents the United States, how the eclipse affects the United States, and the United States' influence with other countries, especially North Korea, was a big concern. And we started to talk about divisions in different countries. And one of the things that I've been looking at in a historical context is the horoscope of the Confederacy. Because every time something begins, whether it's a birthday, whether it's a business, whether it's a wedding, or the contractual merger of a concept, like in this case, the Southern Confederacy, when certain leaders came together and said, this is what we are doing. We are no longer part of the United States. We are the Confederacy. That horoscope has never formally been dissolved because the Confederacy was never formally dissolved. There was a surrender of the Civil War. There were some contractual discussions, some of which we know were not honored, with what was to happen with the men and women and children who were slaves. They were not given the certain agreements that were discussed. But the things that were agreed upon to make nice with the Confederate leaders, those things just continued. So, very interesting horoscope, the horoscope of the Confederacy. And one of the points about it is when it was forged, the sun was at 15 degrees Aquarius, which is where that lunar eclipse occurred on August 7th. So we are in this eclipse season that is so much about how we look at or talk to one another here in the United States as a nation, what our values are, how we come together as a nation. And one of the things that's quite remarkable is that the solar eclipse that occurs on August 21st triggers the horoscope of Donald Trump, because his rising sign in Leo is at the same point of that solar eclipse, 28 degrees and change Leo. So it's been arresting to hear the news of late and the conversations of late that have so much to do with how the United States defines itself as a country, who its people are, what its people want to be expressed, but more importantly, how well its people listen to one another. And the word eclipse is what eclipses a certain situation. So the situation where, prior to a discussion I had a week or so ago about North Korea, has been eclipsed in the United States by what's going on in our own country. And I think that's a huge reckoning that we're seeing with this big outer planet configuration that began in 2008 through 2012, and we're still processing, and will be through the United States Pluto return, which happens in 2022, 24. I mean, that it's time for us to see how we are going to shapeshift or become whatever we will be. So, as you contemplate the eclipse, whether you're on a beach, in Charleston, in Nashville, wherever you are, as long as you have these on, or if you're in meditation and contemplation, wherever you are, give some thought to what realizes the expression of proper illumination of what you would like to shine in yourself, your self-expression. Because this eclipse has so much to do with integrating the spark that has to do with divine child energy, how a person speaks up for their truth, and really understanding what their truth is without bias, without lens, without preconceptions. What is that raw initial energy? Leo is the sign of the child, the divine child. Leo is the promise. That's in its purity. Leo is many things, but it's also a lot about how do we shine? How do we really live our soul expression to its maximum potential? So the fallout of the eclipse is always going to be about revelations, things coming more to the surface, being seen, right out and visible. So yes, our president and his thoughts are going to be much more clarified, how he projects out what it is he wants to say and how he wants to be heard. And the people, which is the solar eclipse, again, the solar eclipse happens because the moon is in direct line with the sun. So when we look at things in mundane astrology, the sun is indicative of the ruler. In the United States, it's the president. And the moon is the soul of the people. So part of this, I think, is a very, very old wound in this country that needs to be reconciled. It's not going to be reconciled with the eclipse. I don't know that it'll be reconciled by the time of the Pluto return in several years, but I do know that this is something we must work for as a nation. And that goes back to history and memory, and really seeing the memory of what this country is, how it was forged, its mistakes, its sins, its foibles, and not to just brush it off, but to face it full on, make atonement and resolution with it. So yes, I'm talking about Indigenous people. Aquarian that I am, I really think that our government would be a lot more whole if First Nations had a seat at the whole table. Crazy idea? I don't know. And then, of course, making reconciliation and atonement with going back to completing and finishing the story with the Confederacy. Or maybe letting something else happen if our country actually divides and cleaves, as this eclipse is carving. We get to decide, but that requires active participation. But it is fascinating to see how we are cracking open old wounds and looking at things that are truly there in a country that some people's perception of how the world really is, or the country really is not as crystal clear as it is becoming. So when I put on these glasses and it's not an eclipse, I can't see a darn thing. So that's the symbolism of an eclipse. Out of the darkness, we are given insight. Things are revealed. And it doesn't just happen on that day, it's a process. And the process continues as we move through the fall, and it continues to open up as the degrees of the eclipse hit other points that come in. So there'll be more about that later. But for now, I wish you all a blessed eclipse, and to keep yourself in the light and to keep yourself in the fight. Whatever the fight is right for your life. Many blessings.